Hey everybody, I hope you're having a great Friday. So today I want to do something a little different, a slightly different video format at least. My plan here is to show you guys how to write out simple drum grooves, even if you're not at all familiar with music notation. Learning how to write rhythms is a great way to begin to understand basic music notation. Plus, it can help you a lot in learning grooves, learning fills, learning songs beforehand so that you can prepare for your practice time. The method I use is proper notation, but I incorporate a few shorthand elements just to make the notating a little quicker, a little simpler, easier to read when I'm cramming a lot of these grooves onto a drum chart. So this is how I write out grooves for my students in their lessons and for myself on a drum chart as I'm learning songs. Welcome to the Non-Glamorous Drummer. This is a channel that's all about giving you the tips and the topics of the trade to teach you the drumming skills that really matter to help you become a better drummer. If that's something that you're interested in and you're able to learn from this video, I really hope to earn your subscription. So the reason I said different format for this, we're going to be jumping over to the iPad where I'm going to be drawing some stuff out for you and talking you through what I'm doing as we learn to notate grooves. We're going to start off with the bare bones basics here, and we're going to just talk about counting. In 95% of the songs we play, we're basically just counting to 4. Now, yeah, there are songs that are in other time signatures and songs that might involve counting to 6 or something else, but for the most part, we're counting to 4. And so for our purposes here, we're going to say that we're counting to 4 when we're playing drums. So we can assign a musical note to each of these counts, each of these beats, because really, each of these numbers here that we're talking about, these are beats. So let's assign to each of these a note. These will be quarter notes, which we're going to try to fill in here as best as we can. This is one of the reasons behind the shorthand method, one of the shorthand methods I'm going to show you guys that involves writing these without having to fill them in. So we have our quarter notes here, and just with these quarter notes alone, we can actually assemble a basic drum groove of kick, snare, kick, snare, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's all we need. But a lot of times we're keeping time on the hi-hat or the ride and we're playing faster notes, or we might have other faster notes in the groove, which for today's purposes are going to be eighth notes. So eighth notes are twice as fast as quarter notes. Let's turn these into eighth notes. What we'll do is we will write in how we're going to count those first. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so now we can write in additional notes to correspond to those new counts that we've added. And we're going to draw a line across the top. This turns these from quarter notes into eighth notes. The line going across the top. So we now have a measure of eighth notes. There are 8 of them. We're counting those 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And if we still had our quarter notes there, those quarter notes could still line up with these eighth notes just like this, where we've got a quarter note on each beat, on each 1, 2, 3, and 4. We've got beat 1 here, beat 2, beat 3, beat 4, and then we have, in addition to those beats, the ands or the off beats where we have just the eighth notes happening. So hopefully this picture here, this mathematical relationship makes sense. So let's move ahead a little bit. First we'll do a little bit of review here just on eighth notes versus quarter notes. There's our quarter note, kind of sloppily drawn, but good enough. Here's our eighth note. If we only have one of them, we just draw a little flag off the top. If we have multiple eighth notes, often they're connected with that one line. Either way, it's either one line or one flag. So we have our quarter note and we have our eighth notes. So pretty straightforward so far, pretty simple. Let's assemble these notes into a groove. Let's put them out on paper the way that we would write out a drum groove, since after all, that is the point of today's video. So let's scroll on to the next page. I'm starting out by writing all these X's, which you may or may not have seen before. It might be weird and confusing, but I'll explain them all here in a minute. These are basically going to be our eighth notes in a measure just like this. Now the cool thing about drum notation is often the note head, you know, this part right here, these are the note heads, whereas these are the note stems. The heads, it doesn't really matter what they look like, and a lot of times we use different styles of note head for different kinds of sounds and articulations. And most of the time when we're talking about symbols, we just use these X's. So that's sort of like the first off giveaway that these notes are being played on the cymbal is that they are X notes, and they're also here at the top of our staff. Down here on the bottom of the staff is where we put our kick drum. It's the biggest, heaviest, lowest pitched instrument on the kit, and so it's on the bottom. So that's pretty easy to remember. The snare is going to go right here in the middle. And also, I've just done this first shorthand method here in writing these notes. Instead of writing out an actual note like that and going to the trouble to fill it in, which takes a while and tends to get sloppy, I've literally just made the note head a line and then a stem. And since most of the time in writing drum music, we don't need to write half notes or whole notes, this works just fine because the head of an eighth note is the same as that of a quarter note or a 16th note. So let's pull in a little of what we learned on the page before, talking about counting these. So we've got our quarter notes that we count 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we have our eighth notes that we count them 1, 2, 3, 4, but we also have those ands in between. 1, and let's change this to a little bit of a finer font so that it's cleaner up here. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and just like that. So what's interesting here is that we have quarter notes down here being played by the kick on the bottom, the snare in the middle, and then we have eighth notes up here being played by the hi-hat. We've got quarter notes and we have eighth notes, but they all lock together. You'll notice that we could draw connecting lines here and say, okay, that kick note is right there on beat 1, that snare note is right on beat 2, kick on beat 3, snare on 4. So we could even draw the line longer and say beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, beat 4. Everything's happening together there on beats 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I just want to make that obvious and make sure you can clearly see that. So we could also go over here and we could label off to the side just to make things even more clear that here on the top we have the hi-hat, here in the middle we have the snare, here on the bottom we have the kick. And I'll even write in reminders often for beginner students over here if I'm writing these out in a lesson that we have the right hand playing the hi-hat, we have the left hand playing the snare, and the right foot playing the kick. So hopefully this is all pretty straightforward and makes sense. We have our different zones. We have our kick drum line down here. We have our snare drum line. We have our hi-hat or cymbal line up here. And we've really just got eighth notes and quarter notes that are pretty basic and straightforward to count. Let's jump ahead to another groove. This one will be a little bit more complicated. This time we're going to throw in some eighth notes on the kick and the snare. Starting off just writing at the old familiar eighth notes, keeping time on the hi-hat. But this time we'll do something a little bit different. So I'm just writing in the note heads here first. We'll go ahead and add the bar lines here off to the side. So we've got our kick drum note heads on the bottom, snare drum note heads in the middle. So now looking at this groove, we see that we still have the snare happening in the same place. The snare is still happening on beat 2 and on beat 4. But we have some different things happening with the kick right here. So this one's a little bit different, a little bit interesting. Also, we could analyze it as we have quarter notes, but we also have eighth notes. And of course, we have eighth notes up top on the hi-hat as well. Now, I'm not going to write in the eighth note counting up here on top for the hi-hat since we did this above, and that's pretty straightforward. I think you know how to do that, but I am going to write it in for the kick and snare notes that we have down here. 1, 2, and then right here is beat 3, which is going to be a rest. I'm going to talk a little about this shorthand notation here in a minute. And 4. So this groove, if we count it out, we've got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4. We've got kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, which is a pretty common groove to pop up in a lot of stuff, so it's pretty basic. And again, we can see how every note on the kick or the snare lines up with a corresponding hi-hat note. We have beat 1, we have beat 2, we have the and of 2, we have the and of 3, and then we have 4. Let's zoom into this little spot right here and talk about what I did here as part of my shorthand notation. So the correct and proper musical notation way to write this down here would be to actually write this as an eighth note with a little stem just like that, the little flag off of the stem like that, and then write in an eighth note rest, which just looks like a 7. And so we've got the proper rest in there showing that our eighth note here is on the and of 3. But that takes a little bit more time, and if we're writing in a small cluttered chart, it can make things look kind of confusing, and so I find it more just easy and straightforward to write an empty stem without a note head on it just to represent the rest. So if it's a stem but there's no head on it, that's a rest in my form of shorthand. Now, I didn't come up with that. I've seen other drummers do that, and it's a good, quick way to write things out. That can save a lot of time, and so I find that really beneficial when writing out grooves for students or when writing my own grooves in charts. I hope that made sense to everyone. I know this is the kind of thing that a lot of you already know really well, but others of you are beginner drummers, or maybe you're self-taught and you've never really learned how to properly write out grooves. Either way, this is a skill that I think is really important for every drummer to be able to do, because it makes it so much easier to really learn the parts you're gonna play and be able to prepare effectively for your practice time. Either way, let me know in the comments any thoughts or questions you've got, or even feel free to email me if you've got any lengthier questions that you don't wanna type out in the comments. I'd love to go more in depth with this whole topic and do a part 2 or even a part 3 and talk about 16th notes and more advanced stuff. Let me know, guys, if you'd like to see something more like that, because I'd love to make some more videos along these lines. As always, thanks for watching, and subscribers, thank you especially for watching all of my videos and for supporting my channel and everything I'm trying to do here. And if you haven't subscribed, I hope you're able to learn something from this or from some of my other videos that are all about this non-glamorous drum thing. I hope you're able to grow as a drummer and get better, and so I really hope to earn your subscription. Thanks for watching, take care, I will see you next week. Have a great weekend, guys.